Writing a story without conflict is like handing in an exam without first writing it or standing at the top of a mountain without having first climbed it. A story without conflict isn't a story worth reading. Actually, some would say it isn't a story at all. It's like getting to the end without going through it. And that is because, like climbing to the top of a mountain, the climb is everything that happens from the instant you leave the ground until you're standing at the top. In your story, from the moment you introduce your protagonist until you get him to the end, the conflict is an integral part of everything he encounters along the way. In literature, there are five recognizable types of conflict: man versus man. The opposing views of two people create conflict between them. A good example here is Macbeth. Man versus nature. The opposing force of a storm or a wild animal or the wilderness creates conflict for a man. A good example here is Hemingway's The Old Man in the Sea. Man versus self. The opposing struggle of man against self doubt, his belief of right and wrong or good and evil, creates an internal conflict. A good example here is Hamlet. And man versus machine, the opposing battle against man made machines that creates conflict for man. A good example would be the Terminator. And finally, man versus society. Man's opposing views on society creates conflicts against society itself. A good example here would be To Kill a Mockingbird. If you recall my earlier videos on plot, character, and setting, we examined the need for conflict. You can't have an interesting story without it. Every good story, or at least one that can hold the interest of a reader, must have conflict. It's why you, as a writer, enjoy telling a story, and it's why your reader will enjoy reading it. Time for another of my little tales. A young man on a motorcycle is seen crossing the border once a day carrying two large sacks filled with sand. He is noticed by several people, including the guards on either side of the border. He is suspected of transporting drugs over the border and systematically stopped, and the contents of the sacks checked thoroughly. But no matter how meticulous they are with their search, they can find no drugs. The young man continues this practice every day, and every day he is stopped and he is searched. But like all the other times, there are no drugs to be found. Then, about a month later, a new border crossing guard is hired. He is told to expect a young man on a motorcycle who he will see crossing every day, but to simply let him go because he has been checked dozens of times and all he ever crosses with is two large sacks of sand. The next day, the new guard is on duty when he sees the young man ride past on his motorcycle. Adhering to the advice of his superiors, he allows him to cross, unimpeded. The next day, he watches again as the young man rides past on his motorcycle carrying two large sacks, seemingly filled with sand. But on the third day, he stops the young man and arrests him with proof of smuggling. Today, I'll talk about just how important the conflict is in making your story enjoyable, and then I'll tell you what proof the new border crossing guard had. Don't get me wrong, the protagonist is still the most important aspect of your story. But a character is only as good as the situation she is put in. Take, for example, a story written about a man who sits on a city bench all day and does nothing but just sit there. He doesn't move, he doesn't speak, and he doesn't even acknowledge the odd person who has sat down beside him throughout the day. This isn't much of a story, at least not one that any reader would care to keep reading. There's no conflict. This character is just sitting there taking up valuable pages in your story. So let's add some conflict. A woman walking past the man happens to glance over at him. For the first time, he speaks. There's a man aiming a rifle at me. I need your help. Suddenly, we have a conflict. Man versus man. Now, your reader is very much interested in what will happen next. Why is there a rifle aimed at this man? Where is the person who is aiming the rifle? Then, the woman's phone rings. It's the person with the rifle. Good afternoon. For the rest of the day, we are going to play a series of little games. But first, you need to understand I'm a man of little patience. If you manage to successfully complete these games, Arthur may go home to his wife and daughter. If you fail, I'll shoot Arthur in the head. We now know that the woman is your protagonist. The setting is in the city, and because of her cell phone, we can surmise that it's present day. Because of the phone call, we know two additional things. The antagonist is a man aiming the rifle, and we've reached the first plot point. I'll explain plot points and their importance to your story in a later video. The woman's goal now is to save Arthur by playing the man's series of games. A noticeable difference once conflict has been introduced. Without it, we have Arthur sitting on the city bench for hours on end with nothing much to offer to the advancement of the story. But at this moment, we still know nothing of the woman except that she has been pulled into a situation where her actions will determine the life of another. However, at this point, we really don't care who she is. It's enough for now to know that she has a purpose and a very good one at that. She saved your story. She stopped your reader from putting the book back on the shelf and instead paying for it and bringing it home. Your reader will look forward to finding out what type of person this woman is and follow her throughout the story to see how she handles each of the situations she is forced into by your antagonist, which will inevitably define her as a person. This story is a very good example of conflict because, unlike the story of the wife who's been set up by the other woman for killing her husband in the motel room, there, the conflict is a result of the woman putting herself and the wife on opposing sides. But in this case, where the woman has been made to play a series of games, it's the conflict, first and foremost, that drives this story. The entire plot is based on conflict. She must not only play his game, but win time and time again. Conflict isn't portrayed as a result of the protagonist opposing the antagonist. It's sustained by her agreeing to fulfill his request. Don't get me wrong. She most definitely opposes him, and it's her defiance that will eventually help her to defeat him. In the beginning, she would have liked nothing more than to have just kept walking and forget she ever saw Arthur on the city bench. But the antagonist's insidious series of games of life and death has forced her into a situation that her conscience won't allow her to disregard. Now, since this story is based on the conflict the antagonist has prepared for her in the form of these games, they will each need to be innovative and increasingly exciting. Let's explore the first game as he gives her instructions. I want you to stop staring at Arthur and turn around and walk over to the man standing beside the fruit stand. You are to stand face to face with this man for a full minute without once losing eye contact with him. He will try to engage you in conversation, but you are to ignore him. When the minute is up, you are to walk over to the group of young men to your right and tell them that the man at the fruit stand has just threatened your life. It's at this moment that the woman is faced with another dilemma, a different type of conflict, an internal conflict, man versus self. In almost every good story, there are two types of conflict, external and internal. And as the name suggests, external conflict takes place outside of us, and internal conflict takes place inside of ourselves. And in any conflict that your protagonist encounters, that conflict is always with an antagonist. In this example story, our protagonist, the woman, her external conflict is playing the game to save the life of Arthur. And like most protagonists, she has an internal conflict. She is suddenly faced with lying to a group of young men, which will ultimately result in bringing injury to a seemingly innocent man. Her struggle with herself over right and wrong is her internal conflict here. She knows that to lie to the group of men, resulting in the man's injury, will be her doing. She will have knowingly put the man's life in danger. She could stand on her morals and refuse, but that would only lead to the certain death of Arthur. Weighing the pros and the cons, she takes the lesser of the two evils and does as she is instructed. As she stands and watches the group of young men beat the man senseless and then leave him unconscious on the pavement, the conflict within her rages. She has been made complicit in a crime. The man on the phone begins laughing. Then he tells her something she wasn't expecting to hear. This may help you to rationalize what you just did. Do you see the woman running out of that apartment building to your left? She's the battered wife of the man lying unconscious on the ground. You just helped her to escape. Throughout the story, the woman, through similar games, is conflicted with both externally and internally until the second plot point is reached at the end of Act 2. I'll discuss acts in later videos. Keep in mind, the real conflict that drives your story has to be between the protagonist and the antagonist. But understand this, a good story can't just be based on conflict alone. He could put her through one elaborate challenge more exciting than the other prior, but the story would go nowhere. It would be like sending someone out shopping with an elaborate shopping list. Once they have all the items, then what? This alone isn't a story. Remember, I started out by saying that getting to the top of a mountain without first climbing it isn't really accomplishing anything. For all we know, you might have been dropped there by helicopter. Comparably, writing a great climax to your story without first creating a story with conflict to build to it would be like enjoying the accolades of getting an A on your final exam after someone else wrote it for you. In this story, your protagonist needs a goal to attain. Being an errand girl for the man with the rifle does nothing to help her reach the goal she needs to achieve. And her goal must be realized if she is to help your story reach a satisfying ending. Therefore, our protagonist will have to oppose the man with the rifle. Now, with having to contend with both internal and external conflict, she finds a way to beat the man at his own game. Her final conflict, the defeat of the man with the gun, brings her and your story to the big climax. Well deserved after successfully overcoming each conflict she came up against that had been steadily leading to her ultimate goal, removing the threat against Arthur's life. Like every other aspect of your story, the conflicts that you put your main character up against is what will define her. It's through these conflicts that she is able to realize whether she is worthy of the goal she is seeking or not. And now I'll tell you the ending of the story I call In Plain Sight. The new border crossing guard was hired because he was always good at spotting things that others usually missed. So, when he watched the young man riding past for 3 days in a row for no apparent reason, he finally realized why. He realized that the young man brought the same sacks across the border each day, but he was always on a different motorcycle. He then arrested the young man for smuggling motorcycles across the border. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.
Dreaming music.